In the first week of January 2020, the world held its breath. The United States, in a stunning act of targeted military force, assassinated Major General Qasem Soleimani, the powerful commander of Iran's Quds Force, via a drone strike at Baghdad International Airport. Days later, Iran retaliated, launching a barrage of ballistic missiles at American bases in Iraq. A conflict of this magnitude had the potential to engulf the entire region and become the most significant global military confrontation since the Second World War. Thankfully, the abyss was narrowly avoided. Iran's missiles were calibrated to send a message of strength without inflicting American casualties, giving the Trump administration a crucial off-ramp to de-escalate. Although this crisis was fortunately de-escalated, the deep-rooted contradictions and hostility it revealed compel us to ask, how did the United States and Iran, once close allies, gradually reach today's state of irreconcilable conflict? To understand how these two nations reached the brink of war in 2020 and why the danger of a future conflict remains ever present, one must unravel a history stretching back over a century. The roots of modern US-Iran tensions stretch back to the early 20th century, when British discovery of oil in Iran transformed the ancient Persian land into a strategic prize. Through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, Britain secured a deeply exploitative arrangement. Iran received only 16% of profits from its own oil, while 84% flowed to British coffers. This economic colonialism planted the first seeds of anti-Western sentiment among Iranians.
World War II deepened these grievances. Despite Iran's declared neutrality, Britain and the Soviet Union invaded in 1941, installing the young Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as Shah. Iran became a crucial supply route for Allied aid to the Soviet Union, hosting over 30,000 American troops. This occupation left Iranians acutely aware of their vulnerability to great power manipulation. The pivotal moment came in 1951, when Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The move enjoyed overwhelming popular support and unanimous parliamentary backing, but it shocked the West. Britain imposed a global oil embargo and sought American assistance. Feeling communist influence under Cold War logic, the Eisenhower administration authorized Operation Ajax in 1953, a CIA MI6 coup that toppled Iran's democratic government. The coup's consequences were profound and lasting. Mossadegh was placed under house arrest for life. Hundreds died in orchestrated violence. Iran's democratic experiment was crushed. For Iranians, America's name became synonymous with conspiracy and betrayal, an original sin that would poison relations for generations. Following the coup, Iran became America's most vital Middle Eastern ally. Under the Nixon Doctrine's twin pillar strategy, the United States heavily armed both Iran and Saudi Arabia to police the Persian Gulf. Billions in advanced weaponry flowed to Iran, creating one of the region's most formidable militaries. The Shah's regime was staunchly pro-American, pro-Western, and, uniquely among Islamic nations, pro-Israel.
President Jimmy Carter famously called Iran an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world in late 1977. The Shah's White Revolution brought land reform, women's suffrage, and modernization programs. Yet beneath the surface of gleaming infrastructure and a westernized elite, deep discontent was brewing. The Shah's authoritarian rule relied on Savak, a brutal secret police force trained by the CIA and Israel's Mossad. Savak systematically suppressed political opposition through surveillance, torture, and extrajudicial killings. Thousands of dissidents, from communists to liberals to Islamists, were imprisoned or executed. All opposition parties were banned, creating a political vacuum that would soon be filled by revolutionary forces. Into this void stepped Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a charismatic Shia cleric who denounced the Shah as an illegitimate puppet of the Great Satan, his term for the United States. Exiled in 1963, Khomeini's influence only grew as smuggled cassette tapes of his sermons circulated throughout Iran. From abroad, he developed his doctrine of vilayat-e-faqih, laying the ideological foundation for theocratic rule.
By 1978, the island of stability had become a powder keg. A broad coalition of secular intellectuals, students, religious conservatives, and working-class Iranians united in opposition to the Shah's authoritarianism and American influence. The spark came when a government-planted article defaming Khomeini ignited mass protests. The regime's brutal response, including the September 8, 1978 Black Friday massacre at Tehran's Jaleh Square, destroyed any hope of reconciliation. As millions flooded the streets demanding the Shah's abdication, the military began to collapse. Recognizing the inevitable and lacking decisive American support, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi fled Iran in January 1979. 2 weeks later, Khomeini returned to a hero's welcome. The Islamic Republic was born. America's most powerful Middle Eastern ally had become its most implacable enemy.
The breaking point came in October 1979, when President Carter admitted the terminally ill Shah for cancer treatment in the United States. To Iran's revolutionary leaders, this decision echoed the 1953 coup. On November 4, 1979, radical students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage and demanding the Shah's extradition. The 444-day Iran hostage crisis became a national obsession in America, paralyzing Carter's presidency and leading to the complete severance of diplomatic relations. As Iran grappled with revolutionary upheaval, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein saw an opportunity. In September 1980, he launched a full-scale invasion, assuming post-revolutionary Iran would collapse quickly. He miscalculated dramatically. The war became an 8-year quagmire that killed up to 1 million people, including 400,000 Iranians.
The Reagan administration adopted a policy of tilting toward Iraq, providing Saddam with loans, intelligence, and military support. Most controversially, the U.S. turned a blind eye to Iraq's systematic use of chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and Kurdish civilians. For Iran, this wasn't just betrayal, it was complicity in war crimes. Simultaneously, the U.S. accused Iran of sponsoring anti-American terrorism through Hezbollah. The 1983 bombings of the U.S. Embassy and Marine barracks in Beirut, killing 63 and 241 Americans respectively, led to Iran's designation as a state sponsor of terrorism in 1984, a label that remains central to U.S. policy. The decade's contradictions culminated in the Iran-Contra affair, where Reagan administration officials secretly sold anti-tank missiles to Iran while publicly denouncing it as the Great Satan. This scandal revealed the complex coexistence of public hostility and covert cooperation that characterized the relationship.
The Iran-Iraq War's final year brought new horrors. In July 1988, the USS Vincennes, operating in the tense Persian Gulf, mistakenly identified Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian airliner, as an attacking fighter jet. The ship fired 2 missiles, killing all 290 aboard, including 254 Iranian civilians. While the U.S. called it a tragic error, then Vice President George H.W. Bush declared, "I will never apologize for the United States of America, ever. I don't care what the facts are." For Iranians, this incident symbolized American indifference to their suffering. The war ended shortly after in a UN-brokered ceasefire, with both sides exhausted and neither achieving victory. The 1990s saw dual containment policies isolating both Iran and Iraq. A brief diplomatic opening emerged with reformist President Mohammad Khatami's election in 1997, but it was short-lived. The 9/11 attacks created an unexpected moment of cooperation, as Iran, an enemy of the Taliban and al-Qaeda, quietly assisted the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan.
This cooperation was shattered when President George W. Bush labeled Iran part of an axis of evil in 2002. The subsequent U.S. invasion of Iraq, placing American forces on both Iran's eastern and western borders, convinced Tehran that only nuclear weapons could guarantee regime survival. Iran's clandestine nuclear program, publicly exposed in the early 2000s, became the new focal point of conflict. The U.S. and allies imposed severe sanctions while conducting a shadow war of sabotage and assassination. The Stuxnet cyber attack and killings of Iranian nuclear scientists demonstrated the lengths to which the West would go to prevent Iranian nuclear capability. Determined to avoid another Middle Eastern war, the Obama administration launched intensive multilateral negotiations. The result was the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, where Iran agreed to dramatic nuclear restrictions in exchange for sanctions relief. The deal removed the immediate threat of nuclear confrontation, while addressing neither side's broader concerns.
The agreement's success was short-lived. In 2018, President Trump unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA, calling it the worst deal ever, and launched a maximum pressure campaign. Iran initially showed strategic patience, but eventually began exceeding nuclear limits in a less-for-less approach. Tensions escalated dramatically in 2019, with mysterious tanker attacks in the Persian Gulf and Iran's downing of a U.S. surveillance drone. The crisis reached its peak on January 3, 2020, when Trump authorized the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the architect of Iran's regional strategy and a revered figure domestically. Iran's retaliation on January 8, 2020, involved firing over a dozen ballistic missiles at Iraqi bases housing U.S. troops, with several dozen servicemen injured by the strikes. The absence of American deaths provided both sides with an off-ramp from wider war. Tragically, the crisis claimed innocent lives when Iran's air defenses, on high alert for American retaliation, mistakenly shot down Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752. All 176 people aboard were killed, including 55 Canadian citizens and 30 permanent residents, as well as 82 Iranians. Iran's initial attempts to conceal responsibility sparked widespread domestic protests and international condemnation.
As of 2025, the relationship remains deeply troubled, despite ongoing diplomatic efforts. New negotiations began in April 2025, following a letter from President Trump to Supreme Leader Khamenei, with Trump setting a 60-day deadline for agreement. The Trump administration has reportedly discussed providing Iran up to $30 billion for civilian nuclear programs in exchange for permanent cessation of uranium enrichment. However, fundamental issues persist. Iran continues to expand its nuclear program, with announcements of readiness to enrich uranium on an industrial scale starting in 2025. The regime maintains its network of regional proxies and its hostility toward Israel, while the U.S. maintains comprehensive sanctions and military pressure.